Okay, good evening, everybody. All right, let's jump right in. Okay, so in this week's Torah portion, Parshas Re'eh, the Torah tells us as follows. This is the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 13, verse 5. You should follow only God your God, and fear Him. You should keep His commandments, listen to His voice, worship Him, and adhere to Him. Okay, in the Hebrew, it's a voisid balkun. You should adhere to God, or cleave to God. Okay, so let's try to understand what it means to cleave to God. If we go to last week's Torah portion, we actually have a very similar verse. In last week's Torah portion, the Torah tells us, if you keep all the commandments, which I command you to do, to love Him, to do them, to love the Lord, your God, to walk in all His ways, and to cleave to Him. Uludavkavai, cleave to Him. Okay. So how can we cleave to God? So Rashi in chapter 11, again, last week's Torah portion, says as follows. Lalachas b'chol derachav, to walk in His ways, and he says as follows. Just as God is merciful, so should you be merciful. Just as He performs acts of loving kindness, so should you perform acts of loving kindness. And then Rashi continues to cleave to Him, and he quotes the Talmud as follows. How is it possible to cleave to God? Is He not described as a consuming fire? Rather, this means to cleave to Torah scholars. By attaching yourself to them and learning from them, God considers it as though you are cleaving to Him. Okay, so the Talmud says, how do you cleave to God? You can't cleave to God. So what do? You cleave to Torah scholars, because Torah scholars are close to God. Now, if we go to this week's Torah portion, however, like we just said, in this week's Torah portion, it's Rashi comments to cleave to Him, and he says, cleave to His ways. How do you cleave to His ways? You should bestow kindness, just like God does. You should bury the dead, just like God does. And visit the sick, just as God did. So, we have here, seemingly a contradiction. Last week's Torah portion, Rashi said, you can't cleave to God. In this week's Torah portion, Rashi says, you can cleave to His ways. So how does that work? And not only that, let's go further. In the Alter Rebbe, Rosh Zaman Liadi, in the section of the Tanya called the Igeres HaKodesh, which are letters that are related to the teachings of the Tanya, he explains this idea, what does it mean to be cleaved to God? So over there, the Alter Rebbe says that the concept of cleaving to God, he says, is clinging to His attributes. As our sages said concerning the verse, and to cleave to Him to His attributes. So, we just quoted Rashi, which seemingly is the basis of this, and Rashi is basing himself on the Talmud, is that we should cleave not to His attributes, we should cleave to His ways. So what is this idea of cleaving to God's attributes? Okay. So, we said that we should cleave to His ways. So what does this mean? That when we cleave to God's ways, we are doing an action. We are doing an action that represents similar to what God does. So in this case, cleaving to His ways would imply that we're doing the action, because the commandment only be the action. For example, there are different mitzvahs that seemingly have two parts to them. There's what's behind the mitzvah, and then there's the actual physical act that we're doing. For example, we have the mitzvah of Torah. What is the main mitzvah of Torah study? Seemingly, the main mitzvah of Torah study should be to understand the ideas that we study in the Torah. However, the only time we ever say a blessing on Torah study. If you're sitting in your home and you're thinking big ideas of Torah, and you're thinking and you're contemplating and you're coming up with new ideas in Torah, and you're thinking of what is the law here and what is that law there and how does that apply here, and etc. etc. And you're thinking about all the Talmud that you studied and all the wonderful Torah that you studied. According to Jewish law, you are not obligated to recite a blessing on the Torah. In fact, if you were to get up in the morning and you wanted to right away start thinking about the Torah that you studied, you're 100% allowed, even before you said the blessings in the Torah that we say every single morning in the morning service. However, if a person says the words, then he's obligated to say the blessings on the Torah. So on the one hand, the actual mitzvah of the Torah study seemingly should be the idea behind it. But what is the actual mitzvah is the action. We have another mitzvah that's similar. The mitzvah of teshuvah. The mitzvah of repentance. The mitzvah of repentance is what? To return to God, which is to make a commitment to stop sinning. However, if we look at Maimonides discusses in the laws of Tshuva, he says, what is the mitzvah? When a person repents and turns away from sin, he is obligated to confess verbally. Even though seemingly the mitzvah is not confession, the mitzvah is a commitment to God to stop doing the sin. Nonetheless, the mitzvah is only the action. The actual commandment is the action. And the same thing applies to prayer. Again, we look at Maimonides. Maimonides says, he quotes the Talmud, and he says, what is the service of the heart? And the sages tell us it is prayer. However, in order to actually do the mitzvah of prayer, you actually have to say the words of prayer. And in fact, we specifically say the words that are instituted by the rabbis. So we see here that there's two parts. There's the idea behind it, and again, obviously, that's very important. When we're praying, we actually have to have service of the heart. And when we're doing teshuvah, we actually have to make a commitment not to sin. And when we're studying Torah, we have to actually understand what we're saying. But at the same time, the action is the most important part, and that is the part that we actually is the mitzvah. So the same thing when we're talking about this idea of cleaving to God. There's two parts of cleaving of God. There's the action. As we said before, there's walking in God's ways. That is mentioned by Rashi in this week's Torah portion. And then there's the second part, which is the part that is the performing these actions because of our connection to God, out of a deep connection to what we're doing. In other words, it's not just that we're got to go through the motions, but actually doing it because we want to be connected to God. Now, so therefore, the Alter Rebbe, when he mentions this idea, he mentions this idea that we should be connected to God, and we should be, and actually not just go through the motions. The Alter Rebbe is telling us that we actually have to be walk in His attributes. It's not enough that we just walk in His ways, do the physical things. But if we want to be connected to God, we have to walk in His attributes. We have to have a sense of commitment and connection. Okay. Now, based on this, we can actually find an interesting story in the Talmud. Let's go back to the Talmud. We have a story about a very famous rabbi. This rabbi, his name was Rabbi Chiya. Rabbi Chiya was actually such an important rabbi that he was one of the main teachers, one of the main students, of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, to actually where the Talmud actually explains that the Talmud once challenged a teaching of Rabbi Chiya by saying, if Rabbi Yehuda Nasi did not teach it, where did Rabbi Chiya get it from? Which was a way of saying that Rabbi Chiya was a dedicated student of Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, the rabbi who put together the Mishnah, and that everything that Rabbi Chiya said had a source. Everything Rabbi Chiya said was connected to his teacher. And the fact that Rabbi Chiya said something that his teacher did not say explicitly was perplexing to the rabbis of the Talmud. It's a very famous line in the Talmud. This idea that Rabbi Chiya was a very important person in the Masorah, in the tradition of the Mishnah and the Talmud. Okay, so what did Rabbi Chiya do? Rabbi Chiya once saw that there was a lack of Jewish education. What did he do? I'm just going to read what Talmud says in Tractate Ketubot 103b. Rabbi Chiya said to Rabbi Chanina, I am determined to ensure the Torah will never be forgotten by the Jewish people. I plant flax and process it into fibers, from which I weave nets. With those nets, I trap deer, feed the meat to orphans, and prepare parchment from the hides. I write the 5 books of the Torah on the parchment and go to towns where there are no teachers. There, I teach 5 children, giving each one book of the Torah to master. I also teach 6 children of the 6 orders of the Mishnah, assigning each child 1 order to learn. Then I tell each of them, teach what you have learned to your friends. In this way, the entire Torah and Mishnah are spread throughout the community. It was about Rabbi Chiya that Rabbi Yehuda Natzi declared, how great are the deeds of Rabbi Chiya. So now, we just explained that Rabbi Chiya was a really important rabbi in the Talmud, meaning he's not a rabbi who's just teaching children as he did. Well, he was a very important person in the Jewish tradition, and I'm sure he had better things to do than to be planting flax, trapping deer, writing scrolls, going to small towns, and teaching. He surely could have found. He had many students. He could have surely found students or other people he could have paid to do all these things. But Rabbi Chiya did it himself. And the question is, why would Rabbi Chiya do something like this? Why would he spend his own time when he had an important job to do? It's not like he was bored. He could have been studying Talmud. He could have been teaching Talmud. He could have been making new laws, not new laws, but teaching new laws. He could have taught things that were never taught before. But he spent his time specifically doing things that seemingly could have been done by somebody else. But what do we see from here is Rabbi Chiya wasn't just doing things in a way of like we said before, just doing the action. Just saying, okay, the action has to get done, someone else could do it, oh, the action has to get done, I could have a student do it, I could pay someone to do it. Rabbi Chiya understood that when it comes to Jewish education and helping another Jew, he wasn't going to limit his influence to what he would tell other people and the chance that it wouldn't get done. So instead, just like we learned now, we just studied this idea that there's the intention of the mitzvah and there's the practical part of the mitzvah. Rabbi Chiya understood that if he wants to, how is he going to bring out this? How is he going to show his dedication to Jewish education, and that people should see how important Jewish education is? It was going to be through his dedication. It was going to be through him doing it himself, and not just because in the end of the day, where is the actual mitzvah? Where is the commandment? Is in the action. So Rabbi Chiya took this passion for Jewish education and he didn't just talk about it. He did something about it. He put effort into it. He showed his dedication, and that's actually where the dedication comes out the most. Where we see how important this idea is, how important what Rabbi Chiya was doing, but specifically comes out the most in the action. So when it comes for Jewish education, we see, and obviously the Talmud told us the story for a reason. We have to learn from this story how important it is that we do mitzvahs. We have to, on the one hand, we have to make sure we take this dedication and we put it into our service of God. We have to take this dedication into actually teaching someone else and bringing someone else closer to Judaism. But we have to take it even further. That we actually have to put it into practice. It's not enough that we are dedicated Jews in theory, or we talk about it a lot, or we tell someone else to go do a mitzvah. We actually have to be put in the work, and that is that what we can learn from this week's Torah portion. We could learn from Rabbi Chiya and this idea of cleaving to God, that we have to both have dedication and be involved in the practical, and that is how we will get more and more people to be involved in Judaism. That is how we get more and more people to be passionate about Judaism and make sure every single Jew has a Jewish education, no matter how old, no matter how young, no matter what your background is. Thank you very much for joining. Have a good Shabbos, and God willing, we'll see you next week.